Hello, folks. Welcome to another edition of Social Media News Live. So happy you're here. Connor's very blurry right now. I don't know why. It's probably the snow that and the sleet and the junk that actually came through Kansas. My wife has been home for 2 days, and it's basically just rained. But we've getting a little sticky stuff. But Connor, how are you in Florida? All blurry, underwater. What's going on?
I'm great, but it's always your fault. Just never forget that. Whatever happens on the show,
it's
always
all
your
my
fault.
fault. Well, we've got Matt here. He's going to keep us. You're in. You're up north somewhere. Where are you at, Matt?
Sort of. We're in Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina.
Okay.
And we are actually about to get hit with snow. So
yeah. So the whole thing with me is like when somebody sneezes hard, we lose power, and that's always the issue. So hopefully we'll make it through the show. It was kind of a big worry and about nothing here, so we're doing pretty good. Matt's going to be talking with us all today before we get into the main part of the show, but I saw him at Momentum. You guys are going to love him because he really opened my eyes. Because I've heard people say, write a book, you can do a book, but I never believed it until I heard Matt's session, and he's got some great things to say, so I'm really excited to introduce you to him today. We've got our pal Rich Watts here saying, good to see you all again, gentlemen. Looking forward to this discussion. Oh my gosh, look how big your comment is. What's going on? Connor pretty much broke everything when he came in today. So let me get everything fixed because, anyway, Connor, I don't know what you did, but you did it. So there we go. So, and then Chris Stone is saying snow day with the show today. That is very true, Chris. It is. Let me fix this some more. There we go. That's better. Snow day, but hopefully we'll stay on track. So I'm going to go ahead and we'll get started here. We'll hit go on the podcast machine and get rolling. You good, Connor?
Let's do it.
All right, here we go. Hello, folks. Welcome to Social Media News Live. I'm Jeff C., and you're not.
And I'm Connor Brown, and this is the show that keeps you up to date on what's happening in the world of social media and more.
You ever considered how publishing a book could open doors you never imagined? Are you curious about the strategies behind turning your expertise into a sustainable revenue stream? Or maybe you're wondering how to use books to build your brand to connect directly with your audience. If any of those resonate, you are in the right place today. This week, we're going to be, I'm really excited to talk with a guest who knows exactly how to make this happen. Matt is VP of Marketing at Lulu Press, and he has helped countless creators and entrepreneurs use books to grow their businesses and expand their reach. So he'll be sharing his story, practical advice, and game-changing tools you can use to start today. So sit back, clear your schedule, clear your mind, and get ready for this week's episode of Social Media News Live. Matt, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. That was a very complimentary intro. Thank you.
Yes, I was impressed. So we're going to talk about some more of this stuff. So Connor, I know you were impressed too.
Yeah, the compliments just keep coming because if you don't know who Matt Briel is, you should, because Matt is commonly described as equal parts Disney culture, tattoos, 80s movies, and a book nerd. Matt is an entrepreneur and the vice president of marketing and communications at lulu.com. After 18 years of leading sales and marketing teams in the media and publishing spaces, he's developed a unique passion for helping creators and entrepreneurs become more successful by leveraging books as a catalyst for new opportunities and sustainable revenue. When he's not obsessing over marketing content, you can find him spending time with his family, traveling as much as possible, but you will never find him wearing a blazer or a tie. Cool personified. Matt, thanks again for being here.
Thank you. We probably should shorten that, by the way.
No, I love that you don't wear a suit and tie because I am the same way. I had to wear a tux for my son's wedding in October, and I about died. I'm just like, why does anybody do
well, maybe
this?
I'll just keep that last line as my bio and drop all the rest.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's the important part anyways, right?
That's right. So I want to also, before we get started too much into the show, I wanted to do a big shout out to our sponsors, Ecamm. You can find out more about them at ecamm.com/Jeff. You can save 15% by using the code Jeff15 on checkout. And by the way, I'm going to be hanging out with Ecamm at PodFest, which is coming up next week. 15th through the 20th, I'll be in Connor's neck of the woods in Orlando. They're actually doing a Disney Day meetup. So if you want to find out more about that, go to my LinkedIn profile. I had reposted that, and you can find out more about that because we would love to hang out with you at Hollywood Studios and geek out about all things Star Wars and eating at Docking Bay 7, which is always fun. So join us there, ecamm.com/Jeff. All right, let's get right into the show. We're talking about publishing, and this is something that, like I mentioned before, I had always thought about, but I never had really, I always thought it was out of reach for, I guess, solopreneurs or small businesses. And Matt, you kind of at Momentum really kind of changed my mind about this whole thing. But when we first jump in, kind of give us the basics. We had our friend Amy Keys was in our mastermind. She asked, like, I don't even know where to start. Like, I know I have a book in me, but I just don't know where to start. Can you kind of give the broad overview of book publishing in 2025?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big question, but I think to keep it relevant to your audience and the people that we talk to most of the time, so solopreneurs, individual creators, small business owners, um, where you would want to start really is kind of determining what's best for your business and why you would want to even publish that book. So whether it's to establish credibility or authority or build your brand or something like that, where you want to go with that book will probably determine where you start. But the first thing we always tell people is find a really good resource for understanding the different types of publishing. There's basically three for the most part, but they can be broken down into smaller, more confusing chunks. But essentially, there's traditional publishing, which is like, the top five: Simon and Schuster, Penguin Random House, and you have to have an agent, and your agent shops your manuscript around. Then there's what we call self-publishing, or that's what Lulu is. You're pretty much doing everything yourself, and there is a learning curve there, but we've greatly reduced that curve. And then there's somewhere in between, which is called hybrid publishing. And so, what that means is it's kind of been dubbed like a pay-to-play scenario, where you would link up with a hybrid publisher, you'd show them your manuscript. In most cases, they're going to take it because you're going to pay for that book to be produced. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. A lot of us have more money than we do time or understanding of the process.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can afford to pay a hybrid publisher to do all that work and then also help get your book into distribution channels, it's not a bad thing. It's, in fact, a good thing. So you have basically three choices there. But I think on the creator side, in the individual, like small business owner side, what we're seeing right now is an emergence of people using self-publishing because your timelines are your own. You have more control over everything that's happening. And at the end of the day, you know what the goals are for that content and how that's supposed to help propel your business. So being able to work within your own time constructs is a really beneficial thing. So I think starting at really understanding the types of publishing and then which one's going to most benefit you and your goals for that content. That's typically where I have people start. Like sometimes I'll even tell them, just go do a Google search. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
these days it's a little dicey because you're going to get some AI interpretations of some of those things. But at the end of the day, if you just have an understanding that those three basic models exist in the publishing world, one is probably out of your grasp: traditional publishing. They reject 99.8% of the manuscripts they get. And again, you have to have an agent to get in with a traditional publisher anyways, which costs, money. They're going to take, some of your advance. Hybrid publishing, there is a cost, but it can be a very good route for creators and small business owners if you have the budget up front, the capital. And then self-publishing. So, in the creator world, we all like to have control over what we're doing. So oftentimes I think that's the best model.
Gotcha.
Well, we've lost Jeff's feed, which is great. And that's really, we don't need it, to be honest. But Matt, what are some of would you say the biggest changes you've seen that have recently occurred in the publishing industry as we enter into 2025?
The biggest and coolest things we've seen are, authors leaning into the business side, authors and creators leaning into the business side of publishing and understanding, like, for most people, the average person, when you talk about publishing, you naturally think about fiction books or children's books or things like that. But there's actually a whole world that exists out there of publishing for the business sector, specifically to help you grow your business and your persona. So a lot of people have been leaning into that over the last 12 to 18 months and really getting a better understanding of the business side, what you can do with it, taking more control over that business side, increases your profit margins greatly, by the way, when you're not dealing with a massive third-party retailer platform who's taken a huge cut
Mm-hmm.
of your book sales. The profit margins can be very sizable and can actually add a really nice passive stream of revenue to your business, or an active stream of revenue. The other thing that's really big right now, and the biggest changes we're seeing, obviously, are coming in the form of a lot of the AI and
Mm-hmm.
tools and machine learning that's been happening over the last roughly 2 years, I guess, since ChatGPT was made kind of commercial. So, again, people embracing that business side and not, and then AI.
Yeah. Well, let's dive into a little bit of AI stuff, because you and I were talking a little bit before the show about, a lot of people are up in arms. I mean, it's, when it came out, there was a lot of slop publishing that jumped over, I know, on Amazon, on Kindle. And then people are like, oh, you can't use it. Or people are like, oh, write a whole book in 5 minutes. You have those, ads you see on Facebook.
Yep.
So let's talk about AI and how, how it's kind of impacted traditional publishing models, but how we can use it as a tool for those of us who really do want to get a book out this year.
Yeah, you also kind of just described the life cycle of the commercialization of AI within the writing and publishing world. So it came out, and when I say it came out, again, we're talking about when ChatGPT was kind of introduced to the world on a open commercial level. Everybody was afraid of it in the creative communities, whether you were a writer, a graphic designer, didn't matter. Everybody was, a musician. Everybody was like, oh my God, this is it. We're done.
Right.
AI is going to take our jobs. People are not going to read my books anymore. They're going to read AI generated books. They're not going to listen to my music. They're going to listen to music generated by an AI bot. Like, everybody hated it. They didn't want to talk about it. And even most of the industry heavies at first were like, I don't know about this, especially in the world of publishing and writing.
Mm-hmm.
But I think very quickly we started to see, like, wait a second, there's a lot of other tools and platforms being built on the backs of these AI models and tools. And what started to happen is people, early adopters, started taking these tools and going, well, wait a second, I'm not going to use this to write my book, but this is going to save me 3 hours a day.
Right.
Because now, as a creator, author, designer, whatever, for my business, I would normally spend, let's say, an hour, 2 hours a day on the marketing side of what I do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because as creators, the amount of time you actually spend creating something versus marketing, selling it, and trying to build an audience, like, that's night and day, right?
Right.
So now all of a sudden you have these tools where if you sit down and get over the fear of what the tool can create that could possibly replace you, which is also not going to happen, but really look at how can this tool save me time in my day, and maybe take care of those business things that I don't want to do, right? Like,
Right.
a lot of creative people, they don't want to mess with the business side of it and sitting down and scheduling out social media posts for the next week, and
Right.
dealing with creating content for LinkedIn and all these other things, or maybe lead sourcing, designing these campaigns to go out. So using AI to do that stuff has really been where we've been trying to shine the light and show people, especially creators and authors, like, it's not going to take your job. It's not going to write your books for you. It can, it shouldn't, but use it to really impact how you spend your time in a day, a week, and a month, and how you can better use that time saved to either create more or find other ways to grow your business, or spend time with your dog or your family or at Disney World, which is what I would want to do. All three of those things.
Right.
So that's really the life cycle we've seen so far. What's been happening, again, you talked about when it was introduced, it was just like this complete chaos, really.
Right.
Any author you even brought it up around, like, they immediately got mad at you. Like,
Yeah, exactly.
you were automatically an op or the enemy.
Right.
And now I think people are really starting to settle in with it and understand, like, these are tools, nothing more. That doesn't mean there aren't people out there, bad actors. I call them bad actors, but
Right.
using AI to do just what you said. Like, there are, even on Lulu, we found accounts where we've realized, wait a second, there's 37 titles in this account. They are all AI generated. Like,
Yeah.
you can go on Amazon and find it all day long.
Mhm.
There was a guy that hit the news last year because, I don't know, he created some crazy amount, tens of thousands of books with AI, and was generating, though, a pretty decent stream of revenue off of them. Now, obviously, his reviews and his fan
Right.
base was
Right.
very upset. But
Right.
Yeah.
so with anything, we're going to have bad actors that come through and they go, I'm going to use this for this. I'm going to get one over on the general public. But I think as true creators, as true entrepreneurs and solopreneurs and authors and people who have a genuine interest in adding value to others' lives through our content or our services or whatever it is we produce, these tools are only going to help you get better and provide more value.
So you mentioned at the beginning, self-publishing is kind of on the rise, and a lot of entrepreneurs have done that. Our friend who's been on the show multiple times, Katie Brinkley, is a great example of this. One of the things that I was thinking when you're talking about AI is now, because self-publishers, well, even regular publishers, I know some friends of mine who are published by, like Penguin and some of the big houses, they're still in charge of all the marketing, even though the companies and those big publishers say they're going to help, but a lot of times they look at how many social media following you have to see if you're worth investing in. And so it's a lot of pressure on authors. And I think AI is one of these ways, like you were saying, Matt, where you can do those things like come up with social posts and excerpts from your book and, landing pages and all that kind of stuff that AI can help you with, that a lot of authors, I think, struggled with at the beginning. So I think it's, when you look at it as a tool, it can be a real boon for self-publishing. Do you agree or not?
You're 100% right. And even beyond self-publishing, but again, you hit the nail on the head. There's so many things that, even if you are traditionally published, you are on the hook to do. And these days in the world of traditional publishing, even some of the big name, writers, authors, and stars and people who are producing books, the traditional publishers are relying on them and their audiences to sell the books. Oftentimes they might get a manuscript shopped to them from an agent, and they'll take a look at the manuscript, but really what they're interested in also is the author. How sizable is their social media following? What does their presence look like? What's their capabilities at marketing and selling their own book before they'll take a risk on buying that manuscript and then going to market with it? Because you're right, they're going to rely more heavily on the author these days than they ever have. Most traditional publishing firms have cut their marketing departments by significant amounts over the last 5 years, and we're just going to see more of that. And so I think what you're seeing is a lot of creators and authors in general. They're realizing this, they're seeing this happening in their industry, and they're saying to themselves, well, I've spent all this time building my audience. If they're just going to have me do the marketing to my audience anyways, but they're going to take a huge cut, why don't I just do all this myself? Why don't I subcontract it out to some talented people? But yeah, you're 100% correct. I think the impacts with not only just AI, but in general with some of the other technologies that have really come up to speed with, I think, the rest of what's going on in the publishing industry, have allowed for that to happen. And I think that's where we're seeing this convergence of, creators really owning their content in the publishing world, and also being able to make use of these tools to sustain not only a livable wage, but in many cases, I would say flourish financially.
That's cool.
Yeah. And Lulu helps big direct consumer sales channel. So, Matt, what kind of benefits does that a direct to consumer approach pair traditional distribution method?
So you broke up a little bit there. I don't know if that was me or you, but the gist of the question, I think, is the benefits and differences between direct sales and the emerging technology that's there versus the traditional methods of getting your books into the hands of the general public. And so that is the second piece here that really helps individual creators and businesses and authors be able to attain the things we're talking about. Is you have to have that direct sales component. So what direct sales means for some of those who might not quite understand what we're talking about, especially as it pertains to books, is the traditional method, regardless of how you published, is that you sell your books through third-party retailer platforms. And that could be Amazon, that could be barnesandnoble.com, that could be getting your books into bookstores, all of those things, but they require distribution connections. And it's a file share type of deal. So direct sales allows you to literally spin up your Shopify page or whatever it is you're using. You can use any of the e-commerce platforms that are out there right now, but then connect your books directly to your website and sell them directly to your readers and fans. And so when you combine that technology and how far we've come there with print on demand technology, which is really where Lulu specializes. And then again, a lot of the other things that are happening with these AI tool sets, what you get are these creators and authors who have very robust platforms of their own, where they're not relying solely on other platforms for traffic and or conversions. And what that does for you, the biggest or single most important thing it does as somebody who's trying to establish a brand or a business, is it allows you to own that transaction and keep that customer data. And so what most creators and authors don't really think about, because until, I'd say the last 4 or 5 years, it really wasn't something you could put a lot of time and energy into thinking about, was that customer data and how that impacts you,
Mhm.
and how in a normal transaction, you don't get any of that. So if you sell anything on a third party retail platform, all you get is your share of the revenue, and you'll get some rudimentary metrics around number of units sold. If you're lucky, you'll get some demographic information, but that's it. You don't get any email addresses, shipping addresses, phone numbers, none of those pieces of data that would allow you to remarket to people who spent money on your content, which is extremely valuable in building a business. So when you sell direct, you're facilitating that transaction on your site through your Shopify store or your WooCommerce store. You're keeping all of that data. You're building, and in some cases, if you're already utilizing email lists, great. You
Mhm.
get to add this into your email marketing program. You now have segments of people who have spent their hard-earned dollars on your content, and you have their contact information. You know what they spent, you know what they bought, and so that next time you put out a new piece of content or a new online course or whatever that is, you've already got a built-in base of people who've spent that money. You can go remarket to them first, and even use it as a testing ground sometimes. So that customer data, I think, is the largest thing, and it's a game changer for all small businesses, all individual creators and solopreneurs, early stage startups, anybody who's looking to do some of the things they need to do. Having that customer data is key. The other, I think, really big thing is just giving you, that total control and flexibility over your content. When you publish with a traditional publisher, or even through some third party platforms, you lose some of that control, and you lose some of those decision making opportunities around things like price and how you go to certain markets and foreign rights and things like that. When you sell direct, you keep all of that control, and you control the buyer experience from start to finish, which is also really important if you're trying to establish a brand, and how you think that journey should happen for your customers, buyers, and readers. So those are some really big things that are different now, and they only come with direct sales, or utilizing a direct sales approach.
Gotcha. So one of the things I did before the actual show today is I went to Katie, because I know her and I know she published with you guys, and I said, "What's some things that you didn't realize that was really important about this?" And a couple of things she said. She goes, "What you just said, the benefit of knowing who bought your book is huge, right?" And she said, "I didn't realize how beneficial that really was." And then finding out what the goal is. The book is another revenue stream, or is building out your thought leadership. And she said, having the book helped me get higher caliber clients for sure. So that's, I think, is really, really cool, especially from Katie, who is, I think, one of your, I see her on your ads and stuff like that. One of your kind of cover models, I guess, for book publishing.
She did it right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, she really did it right. And you're right. I think a lot of those benefits that she's recognizing are the exact benefits we're talking about. And if you're in the consulting space like she is, for the most part, right, you want that higher caliber of client. And sometimes, in that space, you struggle for a good lead magnet, a way to
Mm-hmm.
bring in those more qualified potential clients. And if I'm on the other side of that transaction, if I'm looking for, somebody that does what Katie does, and she does it really well, but I'm also evaluating maybe three others
Mm-hmm.
who've handed me their business cards at some conference, but Katie's got a book on it.
Right.
She literally wrote the book on it. I mean, who do you think I'm going to look at first? Who do you think I'm going to prioritize in those four choices,
Mm-hmm.
for what I might need to grow my business? And so, again, she's really tapped in and honed in on that benefit there of using that book as a lead magnet to not only grow her authority and her reach, but again, increase the caliber of clients she'll bring in. There's a guy named Robert Rose in the marketing world. You may know who he is, you may not.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
one of the things he always says which I used to find fault in it until I realized what he was saying, and it makes a lot of sense. But for most people, you're not going to get rich writing a book, especially in the nonfiction business world. So it's not going to, your book sales aren't going to contain multiple zeros. But what it will allow you to do is add an extra zero or two to your hourly rate as a consultant. You know what I mean? And so that really was another way of just saying books aren't necessarily going to directly impact your revenue in some massive way, if that's not, especially if that's not your goal.
Right.
But what it will do in an indirect way is allow you to increase your rates, increase the level and caliber of the clientele that you're bringing in. And so in those indirect ways, as a lead magnet or something along those lines, and an authority builder, you are actually going to positively impact your business and your revenue streams.
Gotcha. So one of the things I understand, having it on your own site, being in control of all the data, getting those emails. Does it still make sense for a publisher to have that on his websites where he controls all that, but also put it to these third-party places like Amazon and all that stuff? Do you recommend that kind of as a best practice as well?
It would depend on what your goal is for that content and again, for your business. So in the world of fiction, yes, we call that going wide. Put it everywhere. You know what I mean? You still, in any case, and in every case, every bit of traffic that you generate, that you spend time and money on, send that to your site to buy it directly from you because you want that customer data. But yes, you can also rely on those third-party sites, especially where you don't have to put any money or capital up front. You can literally just list it and let it go. Rely on them for what they may be able to offer in the way of revenue and some exposure. We always recommend to people, somewhere in the back of your book, you've got to put multiple ways for people to get in contact with you, to view the rest of your content and services. And so that if you do sell it somewhere where you don't have control over that customer data, at least they have multiple ways to get in contact with you and still come into your network in some way or another. So yeah, I mean, in the fiction world, it's very common, and it's a smart thing to do because in the fiction world, you're just trying to get as many books out there as you can and to as many readers' hands as you can. In the world of business and potentially this creator economy, you're oftentimes trying to be a little more selective, but sometimes your goal literally is just to establish your authority. Nobody knows who you are, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the fastest way to do that is to produce some content on a particular niche topic where you can, I think it was you that said the niches are in the riches, or the riches are in the niches. And sometimes that might mean you do need to get it out there in as many hands as possible. So yeah, throw it up there on Amazon, throw it on barnesandnoble.com through Ingram. Be very selective with your keyword choices so that you are getting it into the right hands, and then do everything you can to get them into your owned network, your site, your email lists. That's the key, right? Is making sure that you own that data, because otherwise you don't own any of your social media followers. Everything you post on social media belongs to the channels, not you.
Right.
And so we all know this concept of rented land, and that's just another part of it. Your distribution channels, your sales channels, making sure you're still trying to funnel everything back to your main hub.
Yeah. And speaking of filtering, Connor is not being filtered. He, I guess Florida lost internet. So he's not being rude. He's just not here. So we got some great questions that I wanted to bring up because one of the Rich Watts in our mastermind talked about, like, he'd like to learn more about, workbooks. And then we have Tech Troublemaker saying, hey, I wrote a textbook. Nope, I'm not rich yet. Aha. Yeah. What are your thoughts on using like services like Lulu for textbooks? Does that make sense? Is it something that, like, if you're a speaker, this is a great way to have a workbook that goes along with your session? What are your thoughts on workbooks kind of from a self-publishing venue?
So a big difference between workbook and textbooks, but we'll start with workbooks because that is one of the faster growing products that we've been seeing over the last probably almost 2 years at this point. With the onset of online courses, so, COVID hits, everybody's at home. You've got a lot of people creating content or had been creating content previously, but maybe they were disseminating it in a different way. Online courses became hugely popular. And it started to get to the point where there was a lot of white noise in the world of online courses, whether they were online courses for marketing or it didn't matter, right? There was just a lot of people doing it. So now you find people trying to find ways to differentiate themselves or their courses from everybody else's. And so when we realized that, we went to market with some campaigns around creating supplemental workbooks for your online courses. and that took off like crazy. You guys saw it at Momentum, right? Like
Hmm.
any type of in-person or virtual conference, online course, master class, anytime you can add like a physical supplemental component to that, I, I I've never heard where somebody went, yeah, I don't like that. Get that away from me. You
Right.
can have this back. I don't need it.
Yeah.
And in most cases, they'll pay extra for it. To be honest with you, having that as an asset that you can use, these workbooks are wildly popular, and they'll actually earn you a lot of money because they're very inexpensive to create and produce. With a workbook, nobody's expecting you to design like some beautiful like gallery edition type. Like it's a workbook.
Hmm.
It just has to be, it has to work. Like there just has to be space there. There has to be concepts and value in there. So they're a really great way to also test the market for providing a book. And so if you do a course, if you do an event in person or online or something like that, workbooks are awesome. We even have some templates you can download and make it your own if you're not sure where to start. Um, Lindsay, who was also at
Yeah. Yeah.
Momentum,
She's
she
been on the show.
created one for
Okay.
her women's entrepreneurial group, a really cool workbook. Um, but so workbooks are awesome. They're very easy to create. They're very inexpensive to do. Lulu's one of the only places that does coil bound for those
Hmm.
things, so that gives us a little bit of an edge too. But we love workbooks, and they're a great legacy product too, right? Textbooks are another story. When you start talking about the academic world proper, I'm assuming he's alluding to an actual textbook. Maybe he teaches a class or something.
Hmm.
We have a lot of academics that use Lulu for their textbooks because it allows them to get textbooks into the hands of their students for about 1/10 of the price.
Right.
So I don't. When I was in college, the worst part was buying my books.
Right. Yeah.
They're so expensive,
And they're out of
and back
date.
then
Yeah.
you really didn't have a choice, and the professors didn't have much of a choice. Even a used pile of garbage that I would pick up and the pages would fall out was
Right.
like $300. You know what I
Right.
mean? And then you get to
Yeah.
sell it back at the end of the semester for $50 if you're lucky. So lately, we've seen an emergence of, especially at the some of the lower levels, so community college, trade
Hmm.
schools, adjunct professors, where they have a little more control over the content they use in their courses. They are creating textbooks on sites like Lulu so that they can offer it to their students at a cheaper way, and the professor still makes a little bit of extra money. But like anything, you know, it comes down to what's your goal. If you're creating a
Right.
textbook specifically to add value to a course or students, there's a limited sort of revenue funnel there. But if you're creating something that's more like a reference book, and maybe it's being mislabeled as a textbook, but we have somebody on Lulu that created a reference book around coding Python, right? That thing, he did a great job of marketing it. Everybody on the planet that wants to code Python
Right.
that's not
Buys
going
it.
to school for it has probably read this manual. Like he just did a
Mhm.
really good job. And I can't remember the name of it. It might be something simple like Python for beginners. I can't remember,
Right.
but so there's a difference there of what your goal is for that content. So Rich, who created the textbook, I don't know what the context is around that, but if he created truly a textbook for a college or high school level course or something like that, a trade school, yeah, your revenue pool is going to be limited, especially based on your marketing efforts. But workbooks, those things are great. You just print money with those things.
That's cool. That's cool. So let's get really practical and really transparent. And once again, I love doing the show because it's basically free consulting for me. So, for example, I'm speaking at Social Media Marketing World, right? They cover expenses, but it's not a paid gig,
Right.
to say. And a lot of those conferences are that way. You get opportunities
Right.
to speak, but there's not any kind of financial incentive. Later on, a lot of times you can get gigs from that, but that's beside the point. So would it be a good idea for Social Media Marketing World, if they allow it, would be for me to create a workbook? I'm speaking about AI image generation like I did at Momentum. Would it make sense for somebody who's speaking like at that sort of conference to put the money into creating a workbook that they could sell or even maybe give away? And I love your thoughts about that at one of those conferences where they're been asked to speak.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things there, and I'm glad you brought this up. Um, what we've seen happen, and so you talked about Katie Brinkley.
Mm-hmm.
Katie Brinkley actually participated in a hybrid publishing imprint that we also have called Tilt Publishing. So that's where we helped her create her book. and get it to market. And there's a number of other people that participated in that program and still do. We have another gentleman, his name is Brian Piper. He is in academic higher education. He also created a book, Content Marketing for Higher Education. What he's been doing is where he's being asked to speak at these conferences and trade shows and things. Oftentimes, you're correct. There's no pay for that. They just assume you're wanting the exposure because you've got something you're trying to sell, a service or something like that, and so you'll do it for free, which most people do. But sometimes you can negotiate that and say, "Hey, I know you don't pay, but for the amount of people that show up to my session, would you cover the cost to my publisher for me to be able to bring my book there and give it away to each of the attendees to my session?" And so if your session holds 100 people, and the wholesale cost from let's say Lulu on your book is $3 per book, that's $300. And in many cases, what will happen is the event organizer will say, and I'm also saying this as somebody who has an event, okay, I can get this guy to come speak, and I can also add value to the session attendees by way of they get a free book that he wrote, and I got to pay $300. Okay, seems like a win-win. So in many cases, if you're working closely with your publisher or printer, you can negotiate something like that with the event. Sometimes they'll offer it on their own. We actually had other events reach out and say, "Hey, we're having so-and-so speak at our event. We'd like to have 300 copies of their latest book. What can we negotiate for a wholesale price? We'll work through that." And then lastly, if you can't sort of arrange any of that, like if they're not willing to negotiate any of that or whatever, but you still really want to provide a really good lead magnet, because let's face it, you might go to social media marketing world, you might get 50, 100 people in your session, which is great. They're going to listen to you, they're going to get some really good, because I've sat through one of your sessions, they're going to get some really good helpful stuff, but you also know the scope and the size of that event and how many other sessions they'll be in. So by the time they get home, hopefully they took good notes and maybe they remember a few things that you said, and hopefully more. But at the end of the day, if they were able to bring your book home with them, your session now all of a sudden has a much longer staying power and provides a lot longer long tail value to them than, let's say, one sheet of notes they took on, let's pick on Katie Brinkley, Brinkley's session, on podcasting and social media and the convergence of the two. I just made that up. She's whatever. So yeah, if you can negotiate with your printer or publisher like Lulu and say, "Hey, I'm going to be at this event. Could you ship, 150 copies of my book to the event? And could we do it for, a negotiated rate?" Most times the answer is yes. So I do think it can be a good thing depending on what you're using that book for, right? So again, if it's a lead magnet, if it's solely for you to be able to book, let's say your goal is to come away from social media marketing world with 10 new clients. If that's your goal, a book's not a bad way to try and do that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a great
and
point.
Nobody says you have to have a 300-page book. And in fact, don't do that. Write like a nice 80 to 100-page book on a very niche topic. And yes, give it away to your attendees at the event, or tell them that it's free, but they need to come see you afterwards, or something like that. Again, use it as a lead magnet, and then you'll get truly qualified people, because not everybody in your session might come and get that book from you, but a lot of them will. Either way, it's totally up to you and what your financial sort of limitations are, your budget constraints, but you can do it for relatively inexpensive. If you use somebody like Lulu, they ship the books right to the event for you or to your hotel, whatever that might be. So yeah, it is a great idea. And we do see a lot of people do that.
That's really cool. I took a class on public speaking from Mark Schaefer, who's, he does professional keynotes, and they pay him.
He's going to be at CX this year too.
Oh, cool. Awesome. One of the things he said was, what's really cool is a lot of times if they can't make your speaking rate, you can say, "Hey, okay, I'll reduce it, but can you buy, this amount of books for everybody?" And he said that a lot of times the budget comes out of a different thing than the speaker's fee. And so you'll basically get what you asked for and sell a bunch of books, which I thought was really a great kind of strategy if you're negotiating that. Oh, I didn't know that it came out of a separate, line item on your budget. Then they'll say, "Oh yeah, we can take money from that and put it there." So I thought that was really good.
In most cases, that is true. Again, we have an event, so I do understand the mechanics and logistics of how that works. And Mark is very good at that as well. Yeah. And he has a new book coming out, which is why he'll be at CEX. So
okay, cool.
If there's anybody that's going to give you really good guidance on speaking and or things like that, how to negotiate with event organizers and things like books. He is a great resource for that. We love Mark.
He's a great guy. So we got some real practical questions that I wanted to pull up, and this is from my friend Paul Gowder, who's also I'm going to see him at Podfest in a week or so, and he goes, so if we publish now on KDP, which is the Kindle, is it direct platform? So what's the advantage of using a hybrid publisher?
Hey, Paul. So it's actually two different things, two different types of publishing. KDP is full-on self-publishing, 100%.
Okay.
A hybrid publisher is a slightly different model. So the benefits to using a hybrid publisher would be, Paul, if you're looking to elevate your content and create, I'm trying to remember what Paul said he creates when we were at Momentum, but nonetheless, if you wanted to create, let's say, a higher caliber of a book product, and you wanted some professional editing done, and maybe you wanted to have a cover designer actually do your cover instead of yourself, or some of the other things, a proofreader, a lot of the things that go into actually producing a book that oftentimes get overlooked in self-publishing or when you're using something like KDP. That's the benefit to using a hybrid publisher, is being able to produce a higher caliber product. And in turn, depending again on what you're using that product for, what your goals are, that may or may not be so important. I believe Paul creates a lot of content that is intended to be a lead magnet of sorts. Some of it's low content, meaning not a lot of pages. And so in that instance, I don't think I would recommend using a hybrid publisher, especially knowing the goals of that content. But again, if Paul was looking to create a bigger piece of content around the larger concept of what he does, or his processes and workflows, or whatever that might be that he's looking to do, it may be beneficial to look into a hybrid publisher to get a little bit of a higher caliber of book created, which might yield a bigger return on the number of qualified clients that you're bringing in, similar to how Katie Brinkley explained it to you, Jeff. Again, hybrid publishing think of hybrid publishing as the difference between a general contractor, right? Like if you're doing a home remodel, and you being the general contractor. Self-publishing, like full-on KDP, you're the contractor. Right. It's your remodeling job. So you're responsible for the editing, the cover design, every facet of your book. You're responsible for it. You're uploading the final product into KDP, or even on Lulu. There's a facet of Lulu that operates just like KDP. You're responsible for all of that. And in the end of the day, if there's any issues, that's on you and so forth. But if you're using a hybrid publisher, they're like a general contractor you're paying. They're handling all that for you. They've got great editors that work for them, developmental editors and copy editors. They've got great cover designers. This is what they do all day long. They've got proofreaders. They've got people who will format and lay out the book for you. And in the end, what you're handed over is a really nice book and the files to that book to do whatever you want with, by the way. Just like when you're done with that remodeling job, the general contractor is going to hand you the keys to your new kitchen or room addition or whatever that might be. So sometimes that's an easier way to look at it. But again, for Paul, it's just going to boil down to what content is he specifically, creating? What's the goal for that content? And is it worth having it treated by professional editors, cover designers, formatters, and layout, stuff like that?
Gotcha. I know Paul, so his big thing, Paul's all about email, and he says, yes, I would love to have all the emails from people that are purchasing my books from Amazon. Okay. So Paul's got huge email lists, but he's also got 1 million plus Facebook group. So yes. He's got people, I know he's wanting to get them on his platform. So I think that is smart. And he says he just sent you an email about how to talk about converting his books to the platform. He needs those emails.
So he actually doesn't need a hybrid publisher. And I'll wrap this up real quick though. Really what he needs to do is just figure out how to get his existing content onto his site for direct sale, because that's how he's going to collect those email addresses. Okay. And that's actually fairly easy. And so Paul, offline, please get in touch with me and we'll sort this out. But you don't need a hybrid publisher for any of what you're trying to do there. Going after those email addresses is extremely smart, but you don't need a hybrid publisher for that. Hybrid publisher, the benefit there again is if you want to create a book, you don't have the time to do it or the experience or the resources, you'd rather pay somebody to do it, because at the end of the day, they're just going to hand you those files anyways to do whatever you want with. Or if it's in your contract, they'll also help you get it into distribution. As far as I know, Tilt Publishing, which is our hybrid imprint, is the only one that will help you connect them to sell direct. But nonetheless, you get those files at the end of the process. You can do it yourself anyways. But Paul, reach out to me. I'm happy to walk through that with you, man.
That's awesome. And then another question from pal Jim Fuse says, is there a way to integrate Lulu with Launchcart yet? Launchcart is a Shopify competitor. Do you know about integrations?
Yep. We don't have an app or plugin for Launchcart, as well as several other of the up and coming e-commerce platforms, right? There's Thrivecart, there's Kartra, there's a bunch of them. We only have plugins right now for the major platforms. However, if you are developmentally, sorry, that's not the right way to say that. If you are technically inclined, if you're a developer or you have access to a developer or somebody who understands APIs, we have a print API. So you can basically use that print API on any platform or website. It doesn't matter. And that print API plugs right into our print network on the back end. So using what he's using right now, he could technically, if he was able to do it or knew somebody, you could also hire a developer to do it. It probably cost you, an hour or two of their time at whatever their hourly rate is, $500 or less probably, to get them to integrate that API into your site. But it allows that direct connection again to our print network. So every time somebody buys a book from your site, whether you're using Shopify or a print API or whatever, that order gets transmitted to us on the back end. We print it and ship it directly to your customer. It's white labeled under your branding, whatever you want. And so you never have to touch any of that. We take care of all of that. And so while we don't have plugins for a lot of those other e-com platforms, the print API works for that. Or you can create a Zap through Zapier.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I know Paul's done that before in the past. So I don't know about you guys, but this is super exciting. Like to think about that I could actually maybe have a book in 2025. So we got about 15 minutes left. So make sure to ask your questions of Matt. I'm going to try to pull up some more comments here in a minute. But what else that makes me excited is our pals over at Ecamm. Yes, that's right. Ecamm.com/Jeff. You can find out more and save 15% on your first purchase by using the code Jeff15. We are going to be at PodFest coming up next week. So if you're there, come say hi. Even if you're in Orlando or even close, come say hi and maybe even go to the meetup that we're doing at Hollywood Studios, which is going to be a blast. So ecamm.com/Jeff. So a couple things that I wanted to cover before, we kind of moved on is one, Jim actually used Lulu, and I know he did this for his wife. He actually created a coil-bound court reporter journal that he sells, that his wife does that type of stuff, and he did that with Lulu. So that's really cool.
That's awesome
to hear about. A question from Rich about kind of going back to the workbooks. Should a workbook for a digital course contain the full course content or just the complementary content like exercises, etc., that support that digital content? I think that's a great question.
It's a really good question, and we do get asked this question often. So there's two answers to that. And again, it's going to boil down to what your goals are for that particular course and the workbook that goes with it. So there's two ways to approach a workbook or supplemental workbook to a course. One is you're just building that cost into the course, so you're not charging a separate fee for it. And really that workbook is designed to deliver maximum value because it truly is a complementary piece to your course. And so in that instance, I would say I would put as much in there as you can. So a lot of the overarching concepts of what you teach in the course, as well as actual exercises to make them think and understand the concepts, I would put as much as I could in there, because what you want is maximum retention of that information when they leave your online course. And that workbook is always there on their desk or their bookshelf in their home office or in their regular office, right? So, again, if you're not going to be charging separately for it, I would oftentimes put as much as I can in there. If you're going to charge separately for the workbook and there's potential for people to get their hands on that workbook and not necessarily take the full course, you may want to throttle back some of the content you put in there and kind of not leave them hanging, but generate more of that curiosity. So give them enough to where they're like, oh, this is actually really helpful, right. and maybe omit the last few chapters, right? So that they're like, oh, I do need the rest of this. I'm going to go watch the rest of the course, or I'm going to go pay for the other videos in this course, or whatever that might be. So there's two ways to approach it. And then we have seen where some people, back to the first way I said, because they were, going to give the book with the course and not charge extra for the book. And when I say charge extra, I mean like when they sign up for your course, they can check the box to get a supplemental workbook for an
Right.
extra $25 or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people just fold it into the cost. Some take the opposite approach and have found some success with it, where they don't put as much in the workbook because they're technically offering it for free with the course and just kind of folding the cost in or footing
Right.
the cost, so that it does make them want to come back for more courses from you. It's really just going to boil down to your content, what you're talking about, and again, your goals. But I'm a big fan of providing maximum value because I think that'll keep people coming back regardless. Some people are always a little concerned or trepidatious about, you know, essentially giving away the cow instead of just the
Right.
milk, right?
Right.
So
Right.
I don't know. I like, again, let's
Yeah.
go back to momentum for a second. I love what Lou did with his workbooks.
Mm-hmm.
And we helped him create those for this past year. And I thought it was really cool that he let every speaker, send in whatever they wanted. You could put as much as you wanted of your presentation in there or as little. But I still have that workbook on my desk,
Yeah,
by the way.
I do too.
Because there's so much good stuff in there, right? And so for me, like I said about Katie Brinkley earlier, if I'm wanting to maybe contract, because I use some agencies and I contract some stuff
Mhm.
here at Lulu when we don't have the time or the bandwidth. If
Right.
I've got, an email project, I know, like, I can go back in the book and I was like, man, who was that? Oh, it was Paul. Paul has all this really cool stuff about email. Let me reach out to Paul and see if maybe, or I could go in there, and if it's something to do with podcasting. Or we just recently signed on with Ecamm, by the way, so the Lulu podcast now runs on Ecamm.
Sweet.
That honestly was a direct result of not only, having that relationship with Katie Fox
Mhm.
and Ecamm through events and momentum, but I was able to go back in that workbook and look at some of the stuff that Katie had in there. And so when we were developing out our podcast at Lulu and looking at providers, we went with one at first. And we were like, well, wait a second, Ecamm does all these other things, and I have
Right.
this information here. Let me reach out. Let's figure this out. So I think it's going to depend on the content, but
Yeah.
I'm a general fan of putting as much value in there as you can, because I think in the long run, people will appreciate that and they'll come back to you for it.
Yeah. In fact, the funny thing is, I have like all of my momentum workbooks right here on my bookshelf, and I went back actually for this session because you had like 5 pages in the workbook about writing a book, and I was like, okay, this is great stuff. I need to go over this stuff before I have this interview. So I'm totally like, I can see that value of having a workbook, especially for you, Rich, because he does PR for especially dirt racing is what he does.
I remember Rich.
Yeah. And so having something like that where you could have your clients, they're going to keep that. They're going to throw it on the bookshelf. It's probably going to be smeared with grease and oil and everything, but they're going to keep that because of the value that you provide, Rich. So I thought that's really, really good to know. So very, very cool.
Yeah, and the thing with Rich is too, I know a little bit about car racing.
Mhm.
So they're going to use his books, and they're going to get through the basics of how to do PR for their team or their organization or their sport, whatever it is. But there's going to come a point where they go, man, we need to take this to the next level. And who do you think they're going to reach out to?
Right, exactly. Yeah.
The guy who wrote the book that they've been using so far,
Right,
So,
right. Yeah, so
absolutely.
it's super smart. We mentioned Katie Brinkley a couple of times, and she did a great job with this, but I want you to talk a little bit, okay, Jeff finally got his book done. He's going to maybe do the hybrid or the self-publishing model. What's the best way for me to market my self-published book?
Yeah. So this is the one area where you would think that, creators, small business owners, entrepreneurs would really have a leg up on like your traditional fiction authors or people who are writing books for hobbies. And sometimes they do, but we tend to get lazy with our own stuff. And that's what I've found. And so what I would say is start talking about your book early. That's the first thing you really have to understand, is that a lot of people go into writing a book and they think they don't start marketing it until the book is published. Like they think the book launch is when you start marketing the book. And if that's the case, you are already way behind the 8 ball. You're not going to have a good launch. You're not going to have a successful sales cycle. None of those things are going to pan out the way you want them to. You've got to start talking about that book early. For some people, they're uncomfortable talking about the book if they haven't started writing it. So that's totally fine. Some people use that as actually an accountability buddy. So writing in public, going out there and telling your audience, guys, I'm doing it. This is the year. I'm writing a book. I need you to hold me accountable. I'm starting next week, and even sharing some of those writings every week with your audience or every month or whatever that is. A lot of people have had good success with that. But if that's not your thing, what I would say is when you're about 50% of the way done with your book, start talking about it, right? You're 50% of the way done. You're going to finish that thing.
Right.
If you start talking about it publicly, you will be motivated to finish it. You will be held accountable. Your fans and audience will be like, hey, 2 months ago, you said, like, where are we at? How's it going? But it also gives you more things to talk about, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we talked about earlier, generating social media content to keep people interested and build your audience. Sometimes we struggle with coming up with something new or unique or original. If you could talk about your own book that you're writing, most of your fans and followers would be interested in that, and it would give you something different to talk about each week. So start talking about your book early. You got to build the hype around that, and then set up a pre-sale. So a lot of people, they don't do a pre-sale, and that really hurts you when you launch your book and you're going into the market. Pre-sales are also a great way to gauge interest ahead of time, right? And so understanding as these orders are coming in on a pre-sale fashion, you're seeing just how many people are interested. And it's a good way to test a price point and other things. So pre-sales are awesome because it also gives you that little gust of wind in your sales on launch day, right? You already got, it's launch day. So now you've got to fulfill the 300 pre-order copies, right? So you send that through immediately through Lulu. We print and ship all 300 of those. But now you go out to the world and you're like, just ship 300 copies. You got yours yet? Like launch day is a breeze after that. And so you start talking about it early. You really initiate a pre-sales plan and then lean heavily on friends, family, colleagues, and a street team. A lot of people, they make the mistake of feeling like it's a burden to involve their friends or their colleagues or even their family. Or maybe they're a little bit embarrassed and they don't want anybody to see it until it's out there in the world. But that is actually the wrong approach to take because nobody's going to advocate for you more than your friends, family, and colleagues and fans. And so leaning on them to not only help you through like maybe some beta reading, right?
Mm-hmm.
So having them read it ahead of time and give you feedback and things like that, but also having them be part of your street team so that at launch, it's not just you telling the world about your book, it's friends, family, colleagues, expanding that network. And now you've got 20 people talking about your book. And you know better than I do, the algorithms love that. 20 people talking about your book launch versus just you talking about it.
Right.
Again, it's the law of numbers. So I would say those are the three really big things that people, they don't do it, they forget to do it, they don't think about it, or they just like, this feels weird, I'm not going to do it. I would do it, and that's going to give you a successful launch, and it's really going to give you that momentum you need to keep that sales cycle going. A lot of people, their sales fall flat, as does their momentum, and within 3 months, 60 to 90 days. But if you're not talking about it, nobody else is going to talk about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Treat it like a product. For those of you who are used to dealing with product launches or product marketing, develop a GTM, a go-to-market strategy for your book. Treat it like a product launch. Do the same things. You would never launch a product on day one without pre-marketing it, pre-selling it, pre-hyping it.
Yeah. We so one of my friends, Ramon Ray, he has a book called Celebrity CEO, and he hawks that everywhere, and he's great at it. We've had he was on a couple weeks ago, and if you want to look at an example of somebody who's always constantly using his book, I think he does a great job with it, and it does get him in rooms where he wasn't able to get to before.
That's the point.
Yeah. And our friend Deal Billy Thorpe says pre-sales is magic for a lot of products. Hot tip. That is very true. One of the things when you were talking, Matt, was that you mentioned like maybe giving some stuff away or writing in public. Do you recommend like giving a chapter like for people to read, or how much do you give away versus you save for the launch?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of ways you can do it, and there's some people who are really good at it right now. And being very clever. And what I would say is it depends on your comfort level. I've talked to people who are a little trepidatious or scared to put a bunch of their content out there because they're afraid nobody will come and buy the rest of it. I don't think that's generally true. I think if you have something of value, whether it's at the conceptual level or the down to the application level, people will recognize that and they'll come back for more. What I would say is if you could take, let's say, I don't know, the first chapter of your book, which really should be the hook anyways, right? Take that first chapter, drop it into ChatGPT and say, hey, give me 3 sentences from this chapter of my book that you think would hook an audience and really make them want to buy or read the rest of my book. It will give you that. Then take that and go, okay, I want to make sure this is not just clickbait, right? I want to
Mhm.
make sure that I can give them something valuable in this one little string of words, but it's enough to where they'll also want to come and get the rest.
Mhm.
So it's about hooking them with a piece of value, but also showing them there's a much larger amount of value to be had. Kind of like the iceberg sort of
Right.
metaphor, right? You only see the tippy top. What's lying underneath is really what can either do the damage or show you the amount of value there.
Mhm.
But um, I've never seen an instance where somebody came to me and said, "Hey, I gave a chapter out for free. I shared it online," and then nobody wanted to buy the book. If that is truly the case, your book sucks. You should probably go back and take a look at that first chapter, man,
Right.
because you know. But in all seriousness, you're not going to get people to come to the front door if there's nothing that's there of value. So you do have to share something with them. You control what you share, which again is the beauty of self-publishing. And just take a look at that little nugget of value. Don't give it all away, no,
Mhm.
but give them a decent amount of it where they realize, yeah, this person knows what they're talking about. Katie Brinkley knows what she's talking about. I need to
Right.
read the rest of this book, and then I'm going to put some of this into practice, and then I'm going to realize this is still above my pay grade. So I'm going to email Katie and I'm going to see how much it would cost to have Katie's team do this for me because
Right.
they clearly know what they're doing. You know what I mean? It's
Right.
all about incremental ways of securing more and more revenue and or brand awareness. Yeah.
Very cool. So this has been awesome, Matt. Do you have time to stay for a little bit? I have one more question I want to
I
ask
do.
you.
Yep.
Okay.
Doesn't
So
look like the fan was hit yet, so we're good.
good. So one of the questions I wanted to ask is like our friend Lou Mangello, one of his books that he did was he took all his best interviews and condensed them into a book from all his content that he has from his podcast. I've been doing this for 3 years. I've got tons of interviews and transcripts from the show. A lot of the people who are watching are the same. They're creators who've got, years of content behind them. Do
Yeah.
you recommend that they should start writing a book kind of like from scratch and maybe like crowdsourcing it, or use their existing content and repackage it for their first book?
I always push the latter.
Okay.
And I'll tell you why. Everybody loves to give me crap about that, right? They're like, oh, they've heard me talk about this already. They heard this interview. They've listened to every one of my shows. They've told me that they've read every one of my blog articles. Why would they buy it from me in book format? Because they like you. They would. And because if I have a book, so there's a guy named Lenny Rachitsky. I don't know if you know who he is, but he's also, he's got a podcast and
Mm-hmm.
he deals a lot with project management in the corporate and technical world. But nonetheless, he's also a good example, just like Lou is. Lenny does these podcasts. They're very in depth. They're very technical. They're great. He has good guests on there. But if I wanted to put something into practice that I heard on one of Lenny's podcasts, let's say a couple months ago, I've got to go back. I've got to find that podcast. I got to queue it back up. I got to listen to it. I got to find the value there. Maybe make some notes. I got to do all these things, right?
Right.
If I've got Lenny's book on my desk, I literally flipped open to the chapter that was that podcast interview, and it's all right there. That's it. It's one action for me versus 5, 6, 7, 8 actions. I would buy that book. If I'm a fan of Lenny Rachitsky and his interviews and the people
Mm-hmm.
that he talks to and the concepts they talk about, I would buy that book. And he did. He said, listen, I'm going to put the last year's worth of interviews out in volume 1. I'm only going to sell 4,000 copies of it. He sold through them in 1 week. That's it.
Wow.
1 week. The value is there. So just like with Lou, when he compiled all his best interviews, people bought the book because it's that legacy thing. It's there. You can go to it whenever you want. The same for you, for example. We love talking to podcasters and YouTubers and people, people who've been blogging for 10 plus years and they have all this content. You know what I mean? They don't want to search back through your blog for the last 5 years to find that one article that they remembered you wrote, but they don't remember all the specifics. And it would really help them. Like having that book where they could flip right to it because it's all broken out by topic in the outline. You know what I mean? So
Mm-hmm.
there is value in repackaging that content and putting it out into the world in a different format. Not only is that valuable to your existing, user base and fan base, but think about when you write a book, you're now opening up a new audience that you never had access to. There's a large portion of people, believe it or
Right.
not, that read books that don't listen to podcasts.
Right.
I didn't listen to podcasts until recently. And now I have a podcast and I love podcasts,
Right.
but I've been reading books since I could read. You know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
so if you've got a book now, all of a sudden you've got a new audience too. Maybe they've never listened to one of your podcasts, but they pick your book up and they're like, holy shit, holy crap, this guy's interviewed,
Right.
a ton of great people.
Yeah.
He's got this Katie Brinkley girl in there talking about all this really cool stuff, and this Paul Gowder guy and all these other people. Like, man, and now it's sitting on their desk and it's a reference tool for them.
Oh, that's such a good piece of advice. I hope you guys felt how encouraging this was, and I know a lot of you have a book in you that I would love to read. So make sure you guys follow Matt everywhere. Go to lulu.com. Matt, I'm going to give you a couple of minutes here at the end to talk about Lulu Direct,
Sure.
CX, whatever you want. The floor is yours. Just whatever you want to share with our audience.
Yeah, first of all, you guys can find me on LinkedIn. It's I forgot the URL, but it's just Matt Briel. I'm more than happy to talk to anybody about these things or put you in touch with somebody on my team that can help you work through these things. We love to ideate and brainstorm things like this. If you think you have a tricky business where you're not sure if you can, trust me, we love these challenges. We'll figure it out. So you can find me on LinkedIn. You can also email me, mbriel@lulu.com. Or if it's easier for you, you can email me at podcast@lulu.com. We have a podcast called Publish and Prosper. And we talk mostly about using publishing to advance your business and your brand and things like that. We don't do a lot of fiction specific podcasting. So you may find some value there too, for those of you that prefer that format or that medium. And then obviously lulu.com. What we do primarily, Lulu is a self-publishing. Print on demand is our big thing. So we have a global print network, and that means that you could use Lulu to spin up your book and print it and ship it all over the world. And you never have to touch a book. You never have to pack an envelope. You never have to deal with those things. Lulu takes care of all of that for you. If you're not ready to sell direct yet, or maybe you're still working on your website, you can actually sell through the Lulu online bookstore. We still have the largest royalty split of anybody. And that means you just share that link to your book on Lulu in the Lulu bookstore on your website or wherever you want. And every time your book sells, we print it and ship it. You get 80% of the profit. We keep 20%. So that's a good way to get started while you're building out your own website or your Shopify store or whatever it is you're going to use. But once you have that method of direct sales in place, which we can help you as well, we have an onboarding team here for that. Then you can start selling direct. And that's where you really get into, like the stuff Paul was talking about, getting your hands on those email addresses, those contacts for people who are buying your content so that you have that ability to remarket to them. That's really what Lulu's been working on for the last couple of years. And that's why we really focus on the entrepreneurial and creator audiences, because everybody in these audiences, all of your listeners, you all understand the true value of that data, of that content. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can check out our podcast, Publish and Prosper. Lulu.com is the website. And love to have these conversations around how to grow your business with books. I'm a huge book nerd, so I love to solve these problems and help people make money.
Awesome, Matt. Thank you so much for this. Even with all the tech challenges we've had today, this was just fire. Like our friend Billy Thorpe says, this fire, live selling books coming soon. He's a big live seller. So this is awesome. Thank you guys so much. If you have enjoyed this show, would you do me a favor and share it with your friends, especially if you have people that you know who are really thinking about, I've always wanted to write a book, I just don't know where to start. This is a perfect episode for them to go watch or listen to the replay. You can find all that stuff at socialmedianewslive.com. And with that, we thank you so much. Thank you, Billy Thorpe. Thank you, Jim Fuse, Tech Troublemaker, Rich, everybody who watched today and asked questions. I appreciate you. Wouldn't be able to do this show without you. And with that, we'll see you guys next time. Bye, everybody. There we go.